Alright, hello everybody. Friendly Red here, back with more initial impressions. This time around, I'm here to divulge my thoughts on the latest entry in the Monster Hunter series, Monster Hunter Wilds, which has been out for just a little over 2 weeks. I typically try to get my initial impressions videos out fairly shortly after launch, but I really wanted to take my time with this one, play as much as I could, and see as much of the game that's on offer currently. After over 60 hours with the game, I think I'm ready to discuss my thoughts on it right now, while also touching on some of the more frequent talking points I see about the game online as well. Now, get your item pouch sorted and secured, equip your weapons of choice, and mount up, hunters. It's time to get into my initial impressions of Monster Hunter Wilds. I suppose it may be best to quickly go over exactly what Monster Hunter is, for anyone who's unaware. The name is rather self-explanatory though, as Monster Hunter is in fact a series of games about going out and hunting monsters, either alone or with up to 3 of your fellow hunting buddies. As the series has evolved and expanded with new entries over the years, the way in which you interact with the world, monsters, fellow hunters, and more has been changed and altered, but at the end of the day, regardless of which entry you're playing, the core objective remains the same. Pick from one of many different weapon types to utilize, and go out into the world and kill some monsters, which then yield materials which you can use to forge better weapons and armor for your hunter, so you can take on even more powerful monsters. It's a deceptively simple gameplay loop on the surface, because there's so much depth within it once you really get into the game and start looking at all the different monsters, gear, and equipment abilities, in addition to all the other activities and systems surrounding the core monster hunting. Wilds here serves as the next mainline entry in the series, and more specifically, takes a lot of cues and design philosophy from 2018's Monster Hunter World. World really was this huge leap forward for the series, utilizing the increased power of the then current gen home consoles to deliver a truly evolved and exciting rendition of Monster Hunter, one that longtime fans could very much still enjoy despite all the changes and additions, but more importantly, expand the fanbase exponentially, which Capcom succeeded in doing. World has gone on to sell over 23 million copies, and remains Capcom's best-selling game they've ever made. For now. It's obvious World was insanely popular and loved by many, both old and new fans alike, and we can see that is already carried over into Wilds now as well, with the game hitting a concurrent player count on Steam of almost 1.4 million people playing at once, and selling over 8 million copies within just 3 days after its launch on February 28th. And let me tell you, it's all greatly deserved. Of course, Wilds also has some pretty big issues with it, particularly in its technical makeup and performance, especially on PC. I'll get into those aspects a bit later on, but what I want to say now is this. Obviously, yes, I would have preferred that the game ship without any of these issues, but despite any qualms I have with the game, it hasn't stopped me from loving every single minute of the 60 plus hours I put into it, and it's not going to stop me from putting in another 60 plus more, as I'm sure is the case for many people playing the game right now. Monster Hunter Wilds is genuinely some of the most fun I've ever had in any action-centric video game I've ever played. This game is an absolute joy to play, with so much variation in gameplay and encounters depending on which weapons you're using, what monsters you're fighting, if you're hunting alone or with friends, where you're hunting, and so much more. There's so many differing play styles that can be accounted for with all the different weapons, whether you prefer to go fast and flashy with stuff like the dual blades or insect glaive, be a heavy hitter with the great sword or hammer, or attack from afar with ranged options like the bow guns or standard bow. You get all kinds of different action game experiences mashed together in this one game, and it's so much fun to play all kinds of different weapons. Of course, this isn't exactly a new feature to Wilds, but the additions that have been made to all the weapons, in addition to general combat changes, really do contribute to this feeling like one of the best games to play in the series. In particular, I'm really fond of the new wound system introduced during hunts, where continually attacking the same part of a monster will create a wound, which can then be exploited with a new focus attack, with each weapon having its own unique ways of dealing with the wounds created. They typically all look awesome and are great fun to pull off, combined with more specific weapon additions, like the Crimson mode for Longsword, allowing for new combos and faster attacks to be pulled off, or the overall feel or flow of certain weapons being adjusted for the better. Like with Sword and Shield, it just makes for such a damn good feeling action game, regardless of what you've got equipped. Wilds is definitely closer to the grounded combat you'd find in World, rather than the faster and agility-based movement in combat from Rise, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just different. If anything, it's great that one game doesn't totally invalidate the others, meaning there's always going to be a reason to go back and play something like World, Rise, or any of the older games before even those. I may only have rather limited experience with the series, having only played World, Rise, and their expansions before Wilds, and it could also just be the recency bias talking here, but I do think that Wilds may just be the best feeling and playing Monster Hunter game yet. But the variety doesn't stop at the weapons, as the roster of monsters to fight and the locales to hunt them in are just as equally impressive. I'm not going to really go into spoiler territory or anything for the roster, but just know that there are lots of great new monsters to hunt, in addition to some cool returning ones. Though, at least for me, as someone who's only played World and Rise before this, most of the roster is comprised of monsters that are either wholly new, or at least new to me, assuming they didn't show up in either of those games. I did recognize a few returning... faces? Nauts? We'll go with faces, I guess. But yes, there were some monsters that showed back up that I recognized, and was happy to see them again, as I picked some really good ones to bring back for Wilds, and I'm very pleased that one of, if not my favorite monster in the series, Mizutsune, will be coming to the game as part of the first free title update in early April. Very happy that I'm getting my silly little bubble snake back. Much like with the monsters, I won't go into spoiler territory for the locales, but even looking at just the first two areas of the game, the Windward Plains and the Scarlet Forest, they both offer up expansive, dense, and fun maps to explore, traverse, and of course fight monsters in. While not every area in the game is a winner for me personally, I feel that there are more good ones than there are bad, and I've loved spending time in each of them, both in and outside of the hunts. One point of contention regarding the locales in the game I've seen online that I agree with though, is that it's sort of lame that you instantly have access to an overview of the whole area's map upon entering it. Sure, it's super convenient to be able to know exactly where each and every small monster, material pickup, and everything else is, but it doesn't make too much sense within the context of the game. And it also kinda de-incentivizes you to go out and explore, since you know where any and everything is. Not totally, mind you, as there are still some secrets and collectibles that will require you to do some investigating, but I do think Capcom dropped the ball on this one, and I think it would have been better to have us actually run through the area and scope it out ourselves before the map is revealed. An option to have it like that, at the very least, would have been nice for those of us who enjoy exploring and poking around every nook and cranny of the maps. I also feel like this is a good point to make up for a mistake I made in my Red's Radar for February, where I said that Wilds isn't an open world game, when in fact, it is. However, while it may have rather large playable map sections all interconnected to one another without the need for loading screens, the way most players will actually go about playing in those spaces, it doesn't quite feel the same to me as other open world games, but I'll go more into detail about that in a bit. So the weapons and moment-to-moment action is top tier. The roster of currently available monsters is quite varied, a blast to fight, and will only get bigger and better as time goes on. And the world in which you play in is vast, interconnected, and has some great backdrops to fight against in it, but what about some aspects of the game that don't shine quite as brightly as a Rathalos Ruby? But for me, I think I can focus in on two key areas in this regard: technical performance and multiplayer. I don't want to dwell on this too much, as it's already been talked about so much by others who are much more knowledgeable and qualified to do so, but yes, Monster Hunter Wilds is not exactly a super polished and well-optimized video game, particularly if you're playing on PC. On consoles, the overall image quality isn't exactly stellar, but the performance of the game and the various different modes on offer do seem to deliver a pretty solid experience. On PC, things are a bit more dire. While you can certainly get a much better looking image, especially when running the game at native resolution or using techniques like DLSS or DLAA, the performance of the game is much worse than it is on console platforms. Regardless of how high-end your hardware is, it's a struggle to maintain even a solid 60 FPS for many players, and if you want to play at higher refresh rates or frame rates, which many players on PC do, then the only real solution as of now to get a decently stable, high frame rate experience is to utilize frame-gen technology and door upscaling, which obviously isn't ideal, and not everybody wants to, or even can do so. Using FrameGen can introduce visual artifacts that would otherwise not be present, in addition to adding in extra input latency, and it's just not a great look for your game to basically be dependent on FrameGen to get a somewhat decent experience, especially when you're asking upwards of $100+ for certain editions of your game. Even disregarding performance woes for a moment though, I've personally had some other issues with the game that I feel are worth mentioning here as well. I've experienced numerous crashes, network errors, and visual bugs and glitches across my time playing the game so far, and also found that even with the highest texture detail setting, some surfaces in the environment or on NPCs just look flat out ugly and super low resolution. Though from what I've seen online, this could actually be a bug in the game tied to the loading in of textures, and not actually how it's intended to look. All combined though, it lends to this feeling that Wilds came in perhaps a bit too hot, and could have used some more time getting worked on and polished up before release. Thankfully, I've yet to have any more crashes since the first small hotfix was released for the game, and hopefully the overall stability and performance of the game will improve as time goes on, but there's still really no excuses for Capcom here. They really shouldn't have launched the game on PC in this state, and it's really lame that if you want to play the game in the here and now, you have to utilize upscaling, frame gen, and all these other techniques that aren't really a replacement for proper optimization. Plus, because the game isn't properly optimized to run well without these techniques at the moment, it leaves lower-end hardware out of the equation, which is a huge shame. Portability is practically synonymous with the series, and it really sucks that users of stuff like the Steam Deck, ROG Ally, or any of the other PC handhelds on the market right now cannot access this game due to the performance issues. I think I've said everything I can and want to regarding performance in the game right now though, so let's move on to the other big issue with Wilds, that being the multiplayer. Ever since its inception, Monster Hunter is a series that's always allowed for players to group up and slay monsters together, and with Wilds introducing huge, interconnected regions to explore and fight in, it had the potential to house some of the most exciting multiplayer in the series yet. I'd say had, because while the multiplayer does work in this game, there's so much hassle involved in getting it to do so, with so many weird restrictions within it, that it honestly becomes an exercise in frustration. When there are multiple different forum posts and videos being made about how to simply set up and navigate your game's multiplayer structure, you know something's gone horribly wrong. I'm going to do my best to describe just exactly how multiplayer works in Wilds, so please just try and bear with me on this one. So, if you want to play with other people in Wilds, you have a few different options available to you. Firstly, there are lobbies you can enter, which allow for up to 100 players. While you're in a lobby, you're able to see other hunters that are at any of the major base camps in the different regions of the world, and anyone who's in the lobby can post quests to play, with any members of the lobby able to join those posted quests, provided they meet any specific requirements those quests may have. If you're in a lobby and step outside the range of the base camp, you will no longer see any of those other hunters. You'll still be in the lobby, but if you go out and explore, or want to just go out and hunt any monsters that are roaming the map, you'll have to go and initiate that on your own, which will then trigger a quest that other lobby members can join, much like any other normal postable quest. Now, what if you do want to be able to see hunters outside the base camp? What if you want to squat up and explore, fish, gather, and hunt alongside your fellow hunters and friends out in the open world? Well, to do that, you'll need to invite those players to a link party, which is separate from a lobby. Only 4 players can be in a link party at a time, but being in one allows for any members to be immediately notified when one member posts a quest, allowing the others to jump in from wherever they are in the world, base camp or otherwise. This is also what allows for you to be able to go out into the open world areas with your friends and do stuff with them there, but not without undergoing yet another step before doing so. After setting up a link party, if you want to be able to go out into the open world together, then you must invite your link party members to something known as an environment link, which I guess creates an actual instance area of that map that you're in that you can all explore at the same time. Why this can't just be an intrinsic feature of a link party is beyond me, but unfortunately, even if you do an environment link, you're limited to just that one region of the world you started the link in, and cannot seamlessly traverse to different areas when linked with your friends, which sort of defeats the whole purpose of being open world, doesn't it? It's a truly baffling and annoying limitation, and honestly kind of keeps me from wanting to do environment links in the first place. Yeah, it's nice that I can be in this big open space with my friends at the same time, but what if we want to mix it up after a while and go somewhere else? It sure would be nice if we could just, travel to another zone together, but no. Instead, we would have to end the environment link, travel to the other zone we want to play in, and then start up a whole other environment link. I'm not too sure how or why it works like that, and hopefully at this point you can understand the problems here. There's way too much setup, limitations, and hoops you have to jump through just to be able to play the game with your friends, and it's frankly ridiculous that it's like this at all. Seriously, it's 2025. I think it's safe to say at this point, we've pretty much perfected how multiplayer gaming and matchmaking works, but for some reason Capcom decided to throw us back into the early 90s or something with how obtuse, confusing, and frustrating it is to navigate and set up multiplayer in Wilds. I'll be honest, I've gotten used to how it works now, but me and my friends had to go through so much trial and error, and even then, it's still not always guaranteed to work, as we still bump into different connection errors, flat out disconnects, and invitations not being sent out sometimes too. Aside from the performance issues that need to be solved, the multiplayer and how it's structured and set up is something that seriously needs to be addressed ASAP. I think lobbies are cool, but the whole link party and environment link system needs to go sit in the corner and seriously consider what it's done. Now, the first free title update for the game will be bringing with it the Gathering Hub, which oddly wasn't included in the game at launch, and hopefully it might solve some of these issues. If it's anything like the prior games I played, the Gathering Hub will act as a separate area that players can access, acting as a bit of a social area where you can hang out with your friends, prep for hunts, and easily set up groups and quests to undertake. Regardless of if the Gathering Hub mitigates or resolves any of these woes of multiplayer and wilds, Capcom should really consider working on some sort of overhaul of the system, as what we have right now is archaic, frustrating, and no doubt overbearing for players, new ones especially. Multiplayer is such a key pillar of the Monster Hunter series, and it's an absolute blast once you get it to work in wilds, so Capcom really needs to make it as easy and seamless as possible to engage with here, and if this isn't a priority for them now, then it really needs to be. Before we wrap up here, I have one last minute addition I wanted to touch on briefly, as it's a topic I've seen discussed a lot online, and feel it deserves some mention, that being the game's difficulty, or lack thereof as some people seem to think. Honestly, I've never really considered the previous Monster Hunter games to be difficult per se, and the same applies to wilds here. This is certainly a tricky topic to handle, however, as difficulty is subjective, and different people are going to have different experiences within the game, so I'm not too sure what all I can say here. I do feel like a lot of the people who are claiming the game isn't difficult or too easy are probably people who have had prior experience with Monster Hunter, and if that's the case, then I think it makes some sense that they would maybe find the fights in this game to be nothing too crazy. I'm not going to discredit their experiences though, and if they feel the game is too easy, then that's perfectly valid. However, I think it's maybe a bit much to use "this game is too easy" as a hit towards the game, because again, difficulty is subjective, and not everyone is going to have as smooth a time going through the game as others. For me personally, I will say that none of the fights throughout the game really ever gave me any serious trouble, or halted my progression full stop, but I'm also someone who's put in hundreds and hundreds of hours between World and Rise before this, and has a pretty good grasp on game knowledge, weapon handling, build crafting, and so on, and that's probably why. I don't really focus on if the game is too easy or too hard, but rather if it remains engaging and fun. And to me, the game did so through my initial playthrough of the story, and continues to do so now in high rank and the endgame.
Looks like it's moving to a new area. I can't see past my whiskers.
Man, it's never exactly fun to point out the flaws in something you like, is it? Still, criticism is important, especially when it's actually useful and constructive, and hopefully I was able to do that here while going over the more, we'll say, undercooked aspects of Wilds. Make no mistake, this is certainly not a perfect video game, and there's probably lots of other issues and complaints people have with the game outside of the major ones I went over here. It's frustrating, but hopefully by vocalizing our concerns, issues, and problems we're having with the game, Capcom will be able to iron them out, and deliver the truly exceptional experience players deserved on day one. And really, as I said before, despite these issues, I'm still enjoying the game immensely, and I'm sure many others are as well. It may seem odd to say that I'm enjoying my time with a game when it has such glaring issues, performance woes, bugs, crashes, annoying multiplayer, and more, but when the game is as fun as it is, and you really get into it, it can be easier to look past those issues and just enjoy what's working well, rather than focusing on the bad stuff. That, or I'm just a masochist. Looking past the flaws present right now though, and focusing on what's working, Wilds delivers an immensely fun, mechanically dense, addictive, and satisfying loop of monster slaying and equipment upgrading, and it's a game that I'll continue to sink countless hours into over the course of the year. It may have some serious rough patches and blemishes now, but I'm optimistic that Capcom will clean them up as time marches on, and with continued patches, free content updates, and the inevitable expansion that will release for the game, the future of Wilds is looking bright, and I'm excited to see how it evolves over time. Given the current issues, it's totally fair and understandable to wait for now and see how the game shapes up over the next few months, but I can assure you that regardless of when you decide to join in on the hunt, you'll be in for a truly amazing experience. Monster Hunter Wilds is an absolute masterclass action game.
Do your thing, Plundering!
But with all that being said, I think that'll do it for this video. If you made it to the end, I thank you for watching. Your continued viewership and support is greatly appreciated. I hope I was able to entertain, inform, and perhaps get you interested in joining me and the millions of other hunters out in the Forbidden Lands for yourself. And last, but certainly not least, as always, I'll see you next time.